Now, this Brian Ward Memorial Lecture is a series of lectures held annually to honor the memorial of Brian Ward for his visions for a safer Asia and the Pacific, and outstanding personal dedication and commitment to the field of disaster risk reduction and climate resilience. This lecture has featured distinguished guests who shared their experiences on emerging issues such as anticipatory actions for climate and disaster resilience, and implores them to contribute advice to the more of the future in the field of Asia and Pacific. Prior to today, we were graced with incredible speakers such as Mrs. Margareta Wallstrom from 2011, who was then the United Nations Special Representative and the Secretary General for DRR. She discussed about how to tackle disaster risk reduction in the Asian context. In 2012, we had Mr. Jan Egeland, who was then the Deputy Director of Human Rights Watch and former UN Secretary General of the Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief, who signals us a warning as early as 2012 that climate change and inequality are on the rise. In 2013, we had Dr. Serene Pitsuwan, who presented us the lessons learned from the ASEAN's perspective on the Cyclone Nagris. After a decade, ADPC returned with Dr. Tom Mitchell in 2023, who is the Executive Director of the International Institute for Environment and Development, or IIED, who talked about the innovations in climate adaptation and disaster resilience. Now, without further ado, may I please invite ADPC's Executive Director, Mr. Aslam Perwaiz, to provide the welcome remarks and formally open the lecture series. Thank you.
Good morning. I hope you had a good rest yesterday. And thank you very much for the participation yesterday. Just before I invite Mr. Saroj Jha for the remark, I just want to share with you that what a coincidence today that I have to introduce a person who actually introduced me and many others to this particular field. So whatever I am today, particularly on this disaster risk reduction, and I think a couple of my colleagues here also of that time, that after the super cyclone of 1999 in Odisha, a lot of things changed for a lot of us. We were very young. Some people were coming out of the university. Some people were already working with the government. And I think from 1999 to 2001, I think Mr. Saroj Jha will speak about that. I will just keep it for him to say. But by 2001, we actually had about 400 young professionals working under one of these UNDP's disaster risk management program directly supporting the government of India. So that 400 people, and if I have to name, it will take the whole day, but we are actually everywhere after that globally. One of the specimen or the sample is here with me. I am very, very honored that today we have Saroj Jha for this particular session. I have been trying very hard for almost about a year to take his time. Mr. Saroj Jha, of course, from an Indian Administrative Service, and what we call is the disaster volunteer of that particular time, rose to the United Nations Development Program, and then, of course, a lot of direct handling, including the Bam earthquake in the year 2000, 2001, 2002, and then went to the World Bank, and where he is today, I think you should simply Google and you will find it out. We both come from the same geographical location, emotionally charged, but at the same time, in terms of work, we really do not count hours. We only see what we basically can contribute. So it is really my pleasure, Saroj sir, to invite you for this, and this is your place for the next 40 minutes, and then, of course, interaction with the people.
First of all, a very warm good morning, good afternoon, good evening, because I believe we have hopefully many people connecting online. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Aslam was very kind in his introduction. And the reason I say this is because I never really considered myself as an officer. And I'll begin with a story which makes me very emotional every time I think about that day. This is 48 hours after the Odisha super cyclone 99. I find myself in a block which is a small unit of administration, somehow trying to manage whatever locally possible in terms of food, medicine, different kinds of relief for impacted people. And there was nothing much available, by the way. This is super cyclone, eye of the storm. Not many people had found their way into that place. So a lot of people used to come and collect relief materials. So I found a girl, 15, 16-year girl in her early teens, watching everything but not coming to collect anything. So I asked her, don't you need something for yourself, for your parents? Come take it. And she asked me, you know, every time something goes wrong, you immediately mobilize a lot of relief. Why don't you do more on prevention, preparedness, early warning, build the capacity, build more shelters? This is a girl, 15, 16-year-old girl. It made me think. She has a point. And when Aslam invited me to come and speak, and for many years I have been thinking of writing, because I have just so many stories here of distress, deprivation, hunger, inequality, injustice, and how people really have made their way in coping with this and building resilience. I will definitely write about it, but this girl's story has always stuck with me, in my mind, in my heart, that I should do everything possible to make this world a safer, a more resilient, and a better world, where people have alternatives, people have options, not to come in the harm's way when the super cyclone is coming or any other natural hazard people face. So I'm very happy to be here. It's really an honor to speak in the honor of Colonel Brian Ward. And the many names that you mentioned, I had the privilege of working with Margaret Wallstrom, Ian England, and when you mentioned Dr. Surin Pitsuwan's name, I don't know how many of you know. So I worked with him in Cyclone Nargis in Myanmar, and we had a small team from my department actually fully embedded in the ASEAN Secretariat response in the Cyclone Nargis. So, and he was a very close friend as well. And I do remember him, and may his soul rest in peace. So today's topic is a water-secure future for building disaster resilience and reducing risks. So let me mention a few data points from a World Bank perspective, how we look at this topic. But let me also start with a story. So I was in the Democratic Republic of Congo in Africa a couple of months back. And I was visiting Kansai province, which is about an hour flight from Kinshasa. And I was visiting a water project. There were government officials, World Bank team. So I saw a lady standing at a distance as we were going to see the project site. So I went to this lady and I asked her, so where do you get water from? She said, "So which water are you talking about?" "I get water for washing from a river for which she has to literally go almost 2.5 kilometers down the hill into the river, collect that water, come up. That's for washing. And for drinking water, she has to walk many more kilometers on the roadside to purchase water bottles or the big storage cans, the plastic cans on the roadside." Today, if you see the statistics globally, you have close to 2 billion people around the world without access to clean drinking water. And you have close to 4 billion people without access to safe sanitation. You have close to 2 billion people who are currently living in different levels of water stress regions. You have close to 1 billion people who face droughts pretty much very frequently these days globally. Now, in this kind of an environment where you have a very water insecure population, it's very hard to think of resilience. It's very hard to think of these people being able to cope with extreme events when they happen. And this is not just Democratic Republic of Congo story. This is the story in every single country that you come from. I was in Pakistan a couple of months back, and I spent a lot of time in Sindh, in Punjab. And you meet people and you realize that what we take for granted, access to clean drinking water, this is not the case for billions of people even today. The second point I wanted to mention is that, which I'm sure you're all quite familiar, this particular group, perhaps you have more updated knowledge than me, but the climate change has very significantly impacted the hydrological cycle. So many people tell me this is very abstract. What does actually it mean? So I was in Afghanistan a couple of months back, and we are financing a very large water program in Afghanistan through the civil society organizations, UNOPS and others. So I wanted to meet the Afghan civil society organizations. And Melinda, who used to be the World Bank director for Afghanistan, she's now the World Bank director for Thailand and Myanmar. And I'm very pleased that, Melinda, you are here and you will relate with this story. So I was asking these people, how has it been for them to really deal with the water security challenges within different parts of Afghanistan? And I remember some of them telling me, what this has meant is that in the river systems of Afghanistan, as you know, which are all snow-fed, from melting glaciers, that's where they get water from. The peak flow in the rivers used to be in late August, early September. But now they receive peak flows very early in May, late May. So the entire cropping cycle that Afghan farmers have, which is actually more organized towards late September peak flow, has to be completely changed. But that's not the case every year. Sometimes it is in May, sometimes it is in July, sometimes it is in September. How do the farmers get the information on time? How do the farmers cope with this kind of variability in the river flow, which is the main source of water for irrigation for those farmers? There are places today in many parts of the world, I can give you the statistics for Africa, which are in the 9th or 10th year of successive years of drought. Regions which had never experienced anything like this are experiencing it today. And just as a reminder to this group, because you know it all about disaster risk reduction, I have to share something about droughts. So often the disaster risk reduction community is very focused on rapid onset events. Because that's what the media is interested. That's what gets donors interested. And that's why there's a lot of energy in how we deal with the natural disasters which are rapid onset. But droughts which are disasters in slow motion, slow onset disasters do not receive the same level of attention. So when I took this job 2 years back, I was asking myself, why don't I see a lot of attention on drought, in which in my view is a much bigger killer than rapid onset events? And we did a report last year, and I strongly recommend you go back and read that report. The title of the report is Droughts and Deficits. So drought is essentially a deficit of moisture, deficit of rainfall from the average annual rainfall. But why did we name this report as Droughts and Deficit? Is because a deficit of moisture leading to drought over a period of time has most catastrophic human impact. And in that report, we essentially talk about what we call intergenerational consequences. So a child born to a mother in the year of a drought has very serious cognitive disabilities compared to babies born to mothers in non-drought years. And this is not an impact in one generation, ladies and gentlemen. That report also highlights that these impacts can be intergenerational. So a baby born in a drought year can actually impact many generations of those families. And therefore, the call to the policymakers, an organization like us, is please pay, if not more, equal attention to slow onset events. They may not be very attractive to media, but please pay more attention. And I won't go into the details here because there's not much time. But we are building a very comprehensive package of toolbox to really help governments deal with understanding, analyzing, early warning, financing, and everything else which needs to be done, because droughts essentially mean not just good water management, but it's also good land management, good forest management, and so on and so forth. It's very multidisciplinary in nature if you really want to do a good job with the drought itself. The next point I wanted to make is, are we really fit for purpose in a changing climate? So what does fit for purpose really mean? So most of our hydrological systems, rivers, groundwaters, various water infrastructure that we have built around the world, including irrigation systems, were all designed based on what we really knew about the hydrology, the way we knew. But today, all that has changed. Take the case of this city where we are based here, now. And many of you know this country, and we were discussing with Melinda yesterday. So in 2011, if you are here, this city had one of the worst floods in the history of Thailand. And those days, I was heading the disaster management practice at the World Bank, and we mobilized teams and resources to help the government here, together with our UN partners, multilateral, bilateral, to do the comprehensive post-disaster needs assessment. And of course, the report was clearly said that you had more than 14% of GDP lost, 40 billion plus economic losses from that flood, because there's huge concentration of economic activity in Greater Bangkok region. So when events happen, the consequences are huge. But what is important here is the following. 120-year floods are happening now every 18 years on an average. A 20-year flood has become a 4-year flood now. So your old models, old structures, old operating systems will not work. If your dam operator was trained with the protocol for a 120-year flood to operate the dam, ladies and gentlemen, it will not work. Same with the 20-year floods. So the entire, I'm talking about the basic of water management. So your water storage, water management, water infrastructure operations, all of this has to change. And this is what I call, we are not fit for purpose in the way our infrastructure exists. They're designed, they're operated, and they are maintained. That brings me to another very important topic when it comes to fit for purpose. Developing countries, so a lot of dams were built in the developing countries because dams became a very important source of mitigating floods and drought. You are able to store excess water, which is floods, and you are able to make use of that water stored during the time when it doesn't rain through your irrigation systems. So it became actually a very strong safety net for farmers, for people, for governments to really manage water in a way that you prevent floods and droughts. We know this quite well. This has been traditional, no new science in this. Our forefathers, everybody did this. So the data point here is the following. We have close to about 40,000 dams, large dams, in developing countries which are more than 50 years or plus older. And many of these dams, they are located in countries which do not have appropriate legal, institutional framework for dam safety. There is no system of annual safety audits, proper maintenance. So you hear the stories every now and then, oh, one dam has failed here, the other dam has failed there. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not an accident. If we really do not take care of these dams, more dams will fail. You cannot prevent it because they have not been maintained. Plus, they're also not fit for purpose, the story I just shared with you, because of the changes in the water cycle, that you have more rains happening in fewer number of days, and then you have a long dry spell. Our water storage systems are not designed for that level of variability. So, we got to do something about it as well. And especially in this region, we have, I don't have the exact numbers for Thailand, but I know, for example, India has 6,886 dams. Perhaps India is one of the few countries in the world which has established a national register of dams. And I encourage all of you who are in this room, I know Vietnam is working on it, Pakistan is working on it, Indonesia is working it, and the World Bank is involved in all these countries on this topic. Cambodia is involved. I don't know, Cambodia is not in this room. They're also working on it. But this is an area that is important when you talk about resilience, you talk about water security, and you talk about reducing risks of failures in these places. And let me move to my kind of the issue of governance. I was being interviewed by the ADPC media team, and one of the questions they asked me about governance, and being from the World Bank, I often get asked this question, oh, what do you think about the government? Coordination among the agencies in the government, do they work together, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when it comes to water sector, is far more complicated. Water is everywhere, water is local, but still, water needs to be managed locally, but also at the level of basin, at the level of regional governments, at the level of national governments, and guess what? Also across countries. We have close to 360 river basins in the world, internationally recognized. 360 river basins, out of which only 41 have some sort of a framework agreement among the countries which share those basins. So 40 out of 360. The remaining 320 river basins have no such agreement among the countries. Which means water flows originates in one country, it flows through several countries, and there is no clarity what is the share of each country in what is called the international waters. And so the governance in the case of water management involves all levels of government. And I would say not just the government, I would also say people, communities. In the last 3 COPs that I have been, I have met so many young people who ask me, oh, why don't you set up a young people's organization in river basins so that we can talk to each other, because our governments don't talk to each other. And people-to-people cooperation can be the motivation for governments to really focus a lot more on transboundary water cooperation. But the point being that we really need to facilitate a process of more cooperation, more collaboration. And this is where I think ADPC, as I told the media team outside, you can play a very important role. You can be an honest broker. You can provide the platform for countries to come together. And we at the World Bank will welcome this because we really believe we need more dialogue across river basins. Not just the government, people, women's groups, civil society organizations, private sector. Bangkok, management of water here is not just a government thing. All businesses want water to be managed really well in Bangkok because 70% of the GDP of this country is in this region, which is extremely prone to floods. There will be no business security without water security. And water security here will mean building strong flood management systems, not just infrastructure, not just operations, but also connecting people, stakeholders, and communities. So government is very important. And this involves governments to set up a very well-defined legal and institutional framework. We know many of you in this room who are working on National Water Act, which is integrated or linked with the National Disaster Management Acts or the other relevant legal mechanisms in the country. But good water management begins with good governance. And good governance is not a wishful thinking. This is a must. And this will evolve. A week before last, I was in India with the Indian government officials in Ministry of Jal Shakti and others. This was exactly the topic they were sharing with me. They really want to evolve into a more advanced way of managing water resources because water is a strategic resource. And countries are running out of water. You have a problem with excess water, too little water, or too polluted water. So it involves many actors to really work together. So let me move towards my closing, I guess. Okay. He's being very generous. So how do we really go about building a water-secure future? And I said water-secure future is very important for all of you in this room because you are the leaders, champions of disaster risk reduction. A lot depends on your voice, your convening, your ability to bring all the actors together. And given that the UN's data point that 9 out of 10 disasters are water-related, a disaster-resilient world needs to be first water-secure world. And a water-secure world will need to address everything that I said before. How we define it now is called water security is water for people, water for food, water for planet. Water for people we understand. Unless we drink certain liters of water every day, we will not survive. I was in Davos day for yesterday with President Thurman of Singapore and Professor Johan Rockstrom of the Potsdam Institute, which has worked on atmospheric rivers. I won't go into that space because that's a very separate conversation, where he tells you Thailand gets its rains possibly from forest in Bangladesh or in South India. China gets all its rains from Kazakhstan and Mongolia and Central Asia. So we are all connected. It's not just the rivers flowing, it's also the rainfall. And you should definitely read the report of the Global Commission on Economics of Water, which has come up with this term, atmospheric rivers, to demonstrate connectivity in the water systems. And that's why they call it the hydrological cycle is a global common good. You'd get your rainfall not from your own this thing, it comes from somewhere else. So, water security will involve working on a very clearly defined national program which should be very closely connected with the national disaster risk reduction systems. Let me make 3 points here and then I'll close with that in terms of why we feel the countries need to make progress and what are the 3 elements on which where I see the governments need to pay more attention. The first is what I call water security assessment. Each country needs to have a long-term assessment of the demand and supply for water resources. And how do you manage that? Many countries which have adequate water resources now will not have adequate water going forward. There are cities running out of water. You've heard the story of Cape Town, day 0. You've heard the story of Bogota in Colombia, which otherwise had very good water management system. I met the Bogota mayor during the UN UNGA meeting last year, and the story was that 5 years it has not really rained adequately in Bogota, and as a result, all the reservoirs are dry, and they don't have water. Cape Town, same thing happened. They ran out of water. This is happening today in just so many cities. And they're taking it as a chance that somehow they will manage through rationing, through tankers, through all kinds of means. It will not work. We need a much more comprehensive water security assessment, national level, regional, city level assessments. And there are tools available how you can do a projection for long-term assessment of the water security. But it requires a long-term time span, not a 5-year assessment. I was in Melbourne a few months back. So Melbourne has a 2075 water plan. They have a projection today, how much water they need in 2075, and where will that water come from? Melbourne, as you know, doesn't rain much. They rely on desalination. Almost 100% recycle and reuse of water, compared to Thailand, which treats only 27% of its wastewater. I don't know how much of water that is reused, maybe nothing. In your countries that you come from, please go back and look at this data. India, not even 10% water is treated, wastewater. There are very few initiatives which now India is trying to build on for recycle and reuse, particularly in Gujarat, Maharashtra, because the businesses need water, industries need water, and they are ready to recycle. At this meeting we had in Davos, we invited a number of business leaders, CEOs, and a pretty big company told us the story on water security, and why I said no business security without water security, because you need water for business. So this company told us a story. They used to get water in a canal bringing water from a 150 kilometers roughly place. But over a period of time, that was not reliable. Maintenance problems with the canal, leakage, and people were diverting water for something else. So at the tail end, this industry was not getting any water, because it was a low priority. The first priority was to give water to the household and so on and so forth. This industry set up its own wastewater treatment facility, and they started collecting wastewater from every single household in that area. They treated that wastewater, They recycled it and they are using it as the water they need for their industry. And they no longer depend on water coming from anywhere else. They do not use fresh water at all. And industries need not use fresh water. It's okay for them to use treated wastewater. When I was in Karachi with the Karachi mayor and the Sindh chief minister, we talked a lot about actually increasing the whole what we call water reuse. Singapore recycles every drop of water 2.8 times. So wastewater is not a waste. It's a resource. And this is very advanced. If you have, I think, believe our colleagues from Gates Foundation, we work with them quite a lot now on wastewater surveillance and so on and so forth. I see you there. So this is fascinating. How science can be deployed to address water security. But the point being, we encourage all of you, as part of your disaster risk reduction work in the countries, make water security assessment a fundamental requirement, because that is your risk assessment. And you need essentially to work with those agencies to help mobilize fast action towards water security. And water security is not just a function of rainfall or fresh water or groundwater. As Singapore likes to call it, 4 taps. 4 tap strategy. You can Google 4 taps strategy. Tap means taps. 4 taps. Of course, some taps we know quite well. The rain which falls from the sky. And of course, you have rivers. But they have also started looking at desalination. The cost of desalination has really reduced big time. There's not much time to go into the details. And the 4th is reuse of water. We are currently working on a program with Government of India at the request of the Indian government to design a program for 100 cities, mega cities in India, for wastewater treatment, recycle, and reuse. And reuse that water for storage, for recharging groundwater, and for agriculture. Because agriculture consumes 80% of fresh water resources we have. And if many countries are running out of fresh water and rainfall is unreliable, you got to really build that system more reliability by creating a water portfolio which is diverse, which is resilient, and can take care of some of the variability that we talked about before. Let me move to the second point, which is a topic I'm sure it has come up here in this meeting, is about private sector participation. So here is my kind of approach to it. So we at the World Bank, we pride ourselves in doing a lot of financial analytics and data. This is our bread and butter. So we did a public expenditure review. You'll hear this term from World Bank people quite a lot, public expenditure review. So we do it very systematically to help governments understand how public finances are utilized. So we look at not just the quantity, but we also look at the quality of spending in the country. So we did recently a study on the public expenditure review of water sector. And if you have time, if you follow me on LinkedIn, you can track a link to a dashboard which is in public domain. You can track how much money Thailand spends on water, how much India spends on water, how much Pakistan spends on water. For the countries, we have the data, and data which is publicly available. But we collected the data and we analyzed it. What did we find? On an average, developing countries spend only 1.2% of their annual budget on water. Water means water supply, irrigation, dam safety, etc., etc. Wastewater treatment, 1.2%. They spend 5% plus on transport. I have nothing against transport. But you cannot be serious about disaster risk reduction if you spend 1.2% only on water. And this is average, which means there are many countries which are spending way less. Democratic Republic of Congo, the story I shared with you, they spent only 0.5% of their annual budget on water. In a country which has 65 million people without access to clean drinking water. Ladies and gentlemen, this has to change. The governments need to really rethink their priorities for public finances. Now, even if you get the public financing right, the needs in the sector are huge. Those of you who work on the sector, they would know that you need trillions of dollars actually to meet SDG 6 and so on and so forth. So you need tremendous amount of capital to really meet the financing gap. Most governments, they're already quite stretched. They are fiscally in a very tight situation. So we may wish that the governments will spend more, but they can't. And those of you who work in the government, you're familiar with your discussions with the ministries of finance, you know what I'm coming from. But this also creates opportunities for governments to really see if they can develop programs and projects which can crowd in more private sector participation for improved delivery, for bringing innovation, but also bringing capital. There are countries today where the wastewater treatment, recycle, reuse is 100% privately financed and operated. And this area has quite evolved in the last few years. I was in Davos and we met several companies which are kind of very keen to invest. There are institutional investors, pension funds, which want to invest in this space. I was in Chile and Peru a few weeks back with investors to see how do we mobilize more financing, and our role could be to focus on the reforms, regulation, institutions, enabling environment, bridge financing, gap financing, guarantees, blend, I mean, you can name it. This area has evolved so much that, and I encourage all of you to really look at more seriously how do we mobilize more private participation in the sector. And the good news here is every single public officials I meet these days, within 5 minutes, they ask me, Mr. Jha, tell us how to bring private sector in water. So I walked into the Sri Lankan Water and Sanitation Minister's office some time back. We shook hands. His very first question is, I'm glad that you're here and tell us how to bring private sector in the water and sanitation in Sri Lanka. So governments are much more tuned to this idea that it is possible to work with private sector and to identify opportunities for more engagement in that space. And my last point is on knowledge and capacity building, which is my favorite subject. So for those of you know, I used to work for Government of India. And when I was in the Home Ministry, I was Director Disaster Manager in the Home Ministry, and I see there's a colleague here from Home Ministry. So I was the director, and I had one undersecretary and one section officer and one part-time assistant. And you have responsibility for managing so many things with those 3.5 people. I always felt there's something missing in the system, in the way we are organized, the way we work. And of course, it's a long story since 2005 when I left Government of India, how much India has evolved in a very elaborate system for disaster management. I'm very proud of that. We played a small role in this. But the point being that more money will not ensure water secure future. We need to invest in the capacity of both our technical experts, policymakers, and the leaders in the countries we work, from Thailand to Myanmar to Bangladesh to India, Pakistan, Bhutan, Nepal. They are very busy with the day-to-day issues. We need to create opportunities for them to learn from each other, which is very powerful, by the way. My most effective learning when I was in government was when the World Bank invited me to Istanbul to be part of the Turkey earthquake conference, and an opportunity to meet a lot of people. And that was very, very informative, educative for me to learn from others. So events like this, that ADPC brings all of us together, great opportunities to learn from each other. This is very powerful. Knowledge exchange, capacity building. There are many centers of learning is coming up in different countries. Please make use of this. The more you do is less. Investing in every single individual who's responsible for change is the pathway to success. You need strong champions. You need motivated people to really make things happen. You can create everything else, but if you don't have a motivated team, you're not in the right place. So motivation of people who work in different organizations, institutions, is very central. And learning plays a very important role in motivation. You all feel motivated when you learn something. During the Christmas holidays, I did a quick 6-day course on AI. And I'm very fond of using AI for everything I do, including preparing for this event. But the learning is very, very powerful. And I want to leave you with this message that the world is changing so rapidly. What you learned last week may have already become outdated because something else has come up. See, so the whole process of learning is very dynamic. It's also very disruptive. And I think in our collective thinking, we should really think about investing a lot more as we work towards water secure future. And as part of that, we have worked with government of Singapore, and we have established a Singapore Water Center in Singapore. It is already functioning, which is now being used to bring leaders of water utility organizations, water operators from around the region, whole of Asia, and to kind of bring them together and get the Singapore Utility Water Authority, PUB, some of you might know, and their experts to really work together. But Singapore water ecosystem is not just government. It's industry, businesses, academic, universities, researchers, investment banking people. They're all together in that space. So when we take, let's say we had the Karachi mayor and the Karachi Water Corporation MD, just one example, and all of them together in Singapore, you get to talk to a lot of people actually from the Singapore ecosystem. I was encouraging Aslam to play a similar role at the ADPC for countries in the region and look at some of the topics, floods, which are more frequent, more intense, need a very different approach to handling. So building capacity of the countries is extremely important, and I think ADPC can play a very important role. In closing, I want to thank you again, Aslam, the entire ADPC team. You've come a long way. I think if an institution has survived 40 years, you must be doing something great. So I really want to commend every single individual who's been part of this ADPC journey, not only people who are here, but in the governments, the donor community who have really helped ADPC to reach this point. And I wish you really more successes going forward. I also want to commend the RCC members who completed 25 years. And for me, being here was just a reminder to me who I am and where I have come from. The story that Aslam was sharing, which I'm very fond of. End of the day, we're all human beings. We're all who we are because of our passion, because of our commitments, and this is what drives us in our work. So again, thank you very much, all of you, and I wish you all really very, very well. Thank you.